How far would you go to relive your youth? For this married woman, attending her high school reunion meant cheating on her husband with a former classmate. A married woman had been caught cheating on her husband with her high school sweetheart. But that's not even the most shocking part. The husband found out and decided to take matters into his own hands, and let's just say his revenge was not for the faint of heart. Stay tuned for the full story. Today's men are much more serious about choosing a suit or a car than they are about choosing a wife. As a result, more and more marriages end in divorce, and their children grow up to be unhappy people. I don't know where I read that expression, but it is very true. The reason for divorce these days is cheating on one of the spouses in most cases. And if men's adultery is condemned by everybody, especially with women, then women's adultery is often justified by the same women who drive a woman to adultery. Justifications abound. Husband a tyrant. He does not see me as a woman, not loving, not satisfied in an intimate sense, and so on. When a woman commits adultery, her brain usually shuts down. She doesn't think about the consequences and lives only by her feelings and emotions. In my opinion, a woman's cheating is much scarier than a man's cheating. An unfaithful woman destroys her whole family, her children, her husband, her parents, and above all her own soul. All betrayals have one thing in common: sooner or later they will be found out about them. And most treason ends the same way. Very seldom it is possible to build something new on the grief of abandoned loved ones. It is almost impossible to build on happiness. And then, after a while, the second stage of infidelity begins, an attempt to return to the family. I love only you. I was a fool. I can't do without you and the children, and so on. The ending is different. Some accept the prodigal wife, some don't. But regardless of the ending, there will never be happiness in such a family. I married the girl I loved when I was 20 years old. She was my age, and the family life that was to come seemed clear and unclouded to me. Our love affair was developing, following all the canons of the genre. We met at a friend's birthday party, dated for almost a year, and then got married. She was the first woman I ever fell in love with. When my parents expressed doubts about getting married, I said I would pack my bags and just go to her. Anyway, we got married. A year later, a son was born, and 3 years later, a daughter. Olga, my wife's name, I really loved. Over the years, the feeling grew stronger and stronger. I had no reason to suspect her of cheating, because she never gave any reason. I trusted her completely, not humiliated by jealousy, like everyone else. We quarreled sometimes, but the quarrels did not turn into swearing. We quickly found common ground and made peace. We lived like that for 17 years, and then everything changed for the worse. Olga suddenly became irritable, started scandals, and on an empty place, she abruptly changed her image and turned into a brunette, knowing very well that I never liked this type of women. She got new clothes and perfume. My wife began to regularly stay late at work, explaining it with far-fetched reasons. Our intimate life came to a grinding halt. Such changes in family life could not just happen. I started to think about it and came to the conclusion that it all started after the reunion. So something had happened at that reunion that had changed my wife so much. I knew some of her classmates and decided to ask them carefully about that reunion. From them, I learned many interesting things about my wife. It turns out that at school, Olga was in love with a classmate of hers, Sasha. He was quite handsome and was very popular with his classmates. After school, life divorced them. He left for another city to study. There he married the daughter of a factory director, had a child. Olga grieved, and then she married me. So they existed in parallel, in different cities, until Sasha was transferred to our city, and they crossed paths at that unfortunate reunion. They met, and an old love flared up. In general, a fairly banal situation that occurs very often. They slept together that night and could not stop. Olga was looking for any reason to be with her lover. She invented such excuses that any secret agent would have invited. I already knew the name and address of Olga's lover. It was a small matter to cover the lovers on the hot stuff and close the subject. I must say that I felt very shitty. My love for Olga was becoming mixed with a sense of squeamishness, the knowledge that my wife was being used. The other man left me no prospect for a further life together with her. But still, before making a final decision on the fate of our family, I decided to first talk with his wife. I asked her directly about the lover. In response, she started me a huge scandal with hysterics, accusing me of all the sins, and most importantly of his broken life. Not only did I ruin her life, but I dared to question her honesty about women in the name of treachery. I waited a couple more days, and one evening, when my beloved was once again delayed at work, I arrived at the address where my lover lived. He opened the door for me himself, and in response to my question, "Where?" he nodded toward the kitchen. Olga was sitting with one leg propped up on a stool, drinking tea. On seeing me, she sort of flinched and said angrily, "Why did you come? I love him." Just like that, without any preamble. Basically, it was all clear to me, but I made one last attempt and tried to remind her about the children. But she said that the children would stay with her and her new lover, but let them live with me for a while until they got their lives together. I no longer had the energy or desire to continue this conversation. I told my wife that I would not talk about it anymore, that this was the last conversation we would have. I would file for divorce myself. Olga turned away, letting me know that our conversation was over. I silently left the apartment, climbed down the stairs, opened the door of the staircase, and went outside. It was raining outside. I lifted my collar and walked along the wet houses. I remember that evening well. The last night when I was still married to Olga. Both my heart and soul ached. Maybe I should not have given up. Maybe I should have fought for my wife, tried to win her back. But something told me that it was all in vain. She would never come back. Her empty, indifferent eyes, those of a stranger, were standing in front of me again. When I arrived home, I explained to my children that my mother had gone on a long business trip. I dared not tell my children the truth, though I knew that I would have to do it someday. But my son asked me, "Mom left for another husband." I nodded. He hugged me, and we sat like that into the night. The next day, I filed for divorce. 2 months went by. There was still a lot of red tape to go through. We were given time to reconcile. The children live with me. All this time, Olga was in no hurry to make them happy with a new father. One evening, my ex-wife came to me. She announced to me that she had left her Sasha because, in her words, she realized that she had never loved anyone but me. "Please forgive me, do what you want with me, but just don't persecute me." I silently listened to her and explained that her former husband had died there that night in her lover's apartment. I also said that I would not prevent her from seeing her children, but that I would never live with her. Olga looked at me with eyes inflamed with tears. In them, I saw both pain and remorse, and the former love of the last. I managed to hold myself together. And Olga left the same evening she swallowed pills, trying to do something very bad. But a neighbor called an ambulance. Olga was saved. Her parents took her home from the hospital. Several times she called me and asked for forgiveness, but I was still adamant, though my heart and soul hurt a lot. I still loved her and understood that I would never be able to love anyone like that again. Olga now lived with her parents, regularly visited her children, and tried to establish some kind of relationship with me, hoping that I would still forgive her and we would be together. But I will never be able to forgive such things. As the first shocking story comes to a close, another tale of infidelity unfolds. This time, it's about a wife who thought she could get away with cheating on her husband with a mysterious lover. But little did she know, her husband was onto her every move and had planned the ultimate revenge. Get ready for a wild ride as we uncover the steamy details of this affair and the brutal payback that followed. I have always taken marriage very seriously, probably even too seriously. I never walked out on my wife, because I did not see anyone around except my only wife, and there was no need or desire to do so, although I must admit that many women tried. I met my future wife in the early 90s among the guests at my friend's wedding and fell in love with her immediately. We dated her for 6 months and then decided to get married. We had a modest wedding and were over the moon. Our marriage was her second. She divorced her ex-husband a year before we met. Something did not work out. I did not pester her with questions, as I thought it was unnecessary to stir up her soul, and she herself said almost nothing. My wife was a beautiful, smart woman and a great hostess, and I was really lucky. When we married, the whole country was in disarray. There was no normal and stable work. She was a doctor and worked in a military unit. I, apart from my main job, managed to work in 2 other places, and it was not so bad. I wanted very much for my family to have no need. From the first day I met my wife, I was very touchy about her. I loved her madly. I literally carried her in my arms. I considered her the closest and dearest person. 2 years of our life together had passed, but we were not able to have children. This really hurt her. She was very upset, prophesied to me that I would leave her because of her infertility. She was diagnosed with a fallopian tube obstruction. It was a terrible blow for her. But I did not despair. I stood by her, supported her, calmed her down, told her that she was my destiny and that I loved her more than life itself. I reassured her that I could do everything necessary to make her successful in life as a mother, because medicine can now do a lot. She believed me, smiled at me, and for the sake of her smile, I was ready to give myself, only to make her happy. At that time, I worked a lot, I had a goal, and I persistently went to her, constantly needed funds for various examinations by various doctors, consultations at institutes, purchase of medicines. We went and did several operations in different clinics, all sorts of witch doctors and all that. Each time I believed that this time everything would happen and my wife would finally get pregnant, and then we would heal for real. But in spite of all our efforts, nothing worked. It took almost 5 years. My wife lost all hope and put up with it, but I was always optimistic and did not give up. I continued to believe in a miracle. My energy gave my wife strength. She always told me that it was easy for her to be with me, that she could look forward to tomorrow with courage and confidence. I believed her, because I thought she was the person for whom I was born, and I had to live my life for her. She was my strong backbone and my unbreakable bastion. If she is there, I will overcome everything and be able to do anything. One day my wife and I read an article about the Human Reproduction Institute and the possibility of artificial insemination. The idea gave us new hope, new impetus and strength to strive for our goal. I was ready to turn the earth upside down and was more confident than ever that this time we would succeed. The surgery itself and the rehabilitation period were very expensive by my standards at the time, so I started looking for a way to earn the required amount. A small town, we have no special choice, but I somehow came across an ad in one magazine. The reserve soldiers, we invite you to serve under contract, decent wages, and all that. In general, tools were recruited for certain types of work in certain places and were paid good money for the work. I had a chance to serve in the Marines for real, and God did not spare my health. Of course, I was not delirious about any particular patriotic ideas, so I did not burn for someone's political interests. I just needed money, resources to achieve my goal with my wife. In general, I thought about it and decided to take a risk. My wife cried and did not want to let me go. She was afraid and said that if something happens to me, then she will not need the money. I explained to her that, unfortunately, we were not born into millionaire families, and no one will ever give us anything in this life for nothing, unless you come and take it yourself. I calmed her down, told her that everything would be all right, because we need this money not for trinkets, but for a good cause. In general, I traveled to distant places, was not home for a long time, but came back with what was needed. I was lucky. and I did not lay my head, and did not take sins on my soul. And then my wife and I went to the institute, had an operation, and a miracle happened. The miracle, which we had been going for so long. My wife got pregnant. I rejoiced and dusted her. Soon my daughter was born. We were happy like crazy. I just flew on wings, worked and did almost everything around the house, helped my wife with the baby. It was all in my joy, and I did not notice any worries. My wife told me that I was a perpetual motion machine, and I really wanted to surround her and my daughter with all kinds of care. There was so much energy. Soon I got a good and stable job and started earning good money. I dressed my wife very nicely, bought her a car, moved to a big apartment, went to the seas and oceans every year. We spent all our free time together. I tried to organize my free time, trips to the countryside, movies, skiing, skating rink, etc., so my girls wouldn't get bored. Thinking back to those days, it seemed to me that there was a candy truck rolling over on our street, and we deserved it. So 14 years of our life together, and how happy I thought it would be, passed. My daughter was slowly growing up. Family always came first for me. Everything was just for my loved ones. I never felt that my life was ordinary and monotonous. There was never a scandal in the family. I respected my wife, avoided even a reason for her discontent, and if something she did not like the little things, went first to a compromise. I always tried to pay attention to her as a woman. I cannot remember a day when I did not tell her how much I loved her and how much I valued her. When we lived poorly, I always found an opportunity to make her pleasant surprises, flowers, gifts, and various girlish trinkets. She always liked it. In bed with my wife, everything was also normal. I was not conservative, and it seemed to me that we were absolutely open and trusted each other. I tried to be sensitive to all my wife's interests, and, in my opinion, everything was harmonious, and she herself always said that everything suits her, and I fully satisfy her needs. As for jealousy, I can say that I was never jealous of her. She did not give me any reason, although she worked as a doctor in a practically male team, a military unit. Due to my work, I periodically went on short business trips for a week or two, and I always looked forward to coming back home to my beloved. She always greeted me with joy and warmth. And then everything was like in the movies or anecdotes. One day, I went on a business trip to another expedition, and in the city where I had to change flights, I was told by colleagues that my work was canceled and I had to return home. I flew back to my city in the afternoon, bought a large bouquet of roses and champagne, and decided to surprise my wife without telling her that I had arrived. By my count, she was still at work and my daughter was at school. I took a cab home, started to open the door with the key, but the door was locked from the inside. I thought, well, there's no surprise. I started ringing the doorbell, but nothing. I knocked and rang, began to worry, not understanding what was going on, and wanted to call the police. But finally my wife's voice from behind the door asked, "Who's there?" I said, "Honey, you're scaring me. It's me. My business trip was canceled." Even then, I thought that she was asleep, or maybe she was sick. And then she opened the door for me, and I did not recognize her. It was a completely different person. Her eyes were alien. She was looking through me like I wasn't there. I went into the hallway, and through the open door into the hall, I saw some military officer sitting in an armchair. Only then did I notice that my wife was wearing a robe over her naked body. Suddenly, I realized everything. She said to me in a calm tone, "You're bleeding." I saw that I squeezed the bouquet of roses with such force that I literally squeezed it through my fingers. For the first time in my life, my legs trembled so much that I just sat down on the floor at the door. It's hard for me to describe in words how I felt at that moment. I was short of breath. I was panting. My head was a whirlwind of thoughts. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe my eyes. It didn't seem to be happening to me, because it just couldn't happen to me. In principle, my wife is incapable of it. Then she said, "We need to talk. I hope you're not going to cause a scandal. It's not his fault. But I couldn't even stand up at that minute, let alone scandalize. If I had been angry, I probably would have done something irreparable. But now I realize, thank God, that I didn't. I didn't see him disappear from the apartment unnoticed. My wife and I stayed. She sat down in front of me on her knees and said, "It happens in life," and she cried. Then she started telling me how many times in our lives she had cheated on me. I had thoughts that she wanted to destroy me, but she went on, telling me that the very first time she had been with her ex-husband, at the beginning of our relationship, when she and I had just started dating. She said that she met her ex intentionally and gave herself to him to prove to him what kind of woman he had lost. Then she cheated on me with some military medic in another city when she went to a refresher course. She gave herself to him out of pity. He was very romantic and suffered because he had recently divorced his wife and was reading poetry to her. Then there was another military doctor, but already in our town, then another, and finally she approached the last one, with whom, in fact, I found them at our house. She said that they had been having an affair for almost a month and that she had wanted to break up with him for a long time, but hadn't had time. She said that they always met at work and that she was nasty because she desecrated our house and so on. When I listened to her, I asked, "Why did this to me?" She sobbed straight into a scream and said that she could not explain to me the reasons for her actions. It was an inexplicable passion, and there was no excuse for it, and it was up to me to make the decision. At the same time, she swore that if I find the strength to forgive her, she will be faithful to me to the grave. For the first few days, I couldn't sleep or eat, went to work like a robot, spent my nights in a cold sweat, drinking water and smoking nonstop. My colleagues asked me what was wrong. They said I was all black. My wife saw what was happening to me and was constantly crying and begging for forgiveness. I didn't know what to say to her, and so I kept quiet. I didn't know where to go or fail. My head wasn't working at all. Later, many times I was going to talk to my wife, to share my soul as I had always done before, to tell her how much I loved her. But I could not find the right words. There was a lump in my throat all the time, which I could neither spit out nor swallow. Thus passed half a year. During this time I kept thinking and remembering our life, dating in myself, looking for answers. Maybe it was just me, and I was doing something wrong, gnawed myself all over with a guilt complex. During this time, I distanced myself from my wife, both emotionally and physically. Thoughts of sexual intimacy with her did not even arise. I became afraid of having sex with her. I don't know how to explain it. It seemed to me that I was not able to satisfy her, so there was no reason to go to bed, just to embarrass myself. We communicated with her on everyday topics. I paid attention to my daughter without prejudice. As before, most of all, I wanted my daughter not to suspect anything. Then she was at the beginning of adolescence, and I did not want to hurt her, because she had nothing to do with the circumstances. Then, later on, the emotions went away, and the pain in my soul subsided somewhat. One day, I decided to talk to my wife and told her that I did not hold a grudge against her, that I loved her as much and was ready to go into fire and water for her. I told her that what had happened must have changed something in me, but that I could not understand what it was yet, and that I probably needed time for that. I asked my wife to promise me that if life with me was not what she wanted it to be, then let her tell me right away. I would not hold back. No reason to waste time. Life is one and things can still work out differently and with another person. We became close again, but not as close as we had been. I tried to do the same as before, but in bed with my wife, I began to have incomprehensible problems with potency, which made me gnaw myself even more. So another 6 years passed, and the family was always in the first place for me, and the question of whether she was cheating on me or not, I stopped wondering. She was just as beautiful, smart, a great hostess, and a good mother. Yes, I forgave her, but something in me broke, scorched everything in my soul, empty. This poison poisoned me to the bone, my indestructible bastion collapse like a house of cards, and the feeling of new somehow no. In time, I became a different person. The true meaning of the word treason is that everything changed, I changed. I remembered with a smile the days when I was wandering around faraway lands, earning money to have a daughter. Back then, I had the phrase written on my backpack unloading. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. After a while, I suddenly stopped feeling the inner weight that had been weighing me down for so long. It was strange, really strange. I tried to comprehend and understand what was stopping me from changing my life before. I don't know. I was always optimistic and believed in the best, hoped that everything would settle down and be fine. And it did settle down, but at the same time, something very important was gone from my soul, the very thing that gave meaning to the existence of our marriage, something that motivated me to go forward. My stupid responsibility dictated that I couldn't drop everything and just leave, because that would be a betrayal. But it happened. No, not a betrayal. Just like that, suddenly, and all of a sudden my attitude towards everything that had happened became different, and I did not feel like a traitor. One morning I woke up. I suddenly felt that my internal changes in my head had come to an end, and, as if waking up from oblivion, I realized that for a long time I had not been living my own life at all, but a completely foreign one. My wife, who was sleeping next to me, looking at her asleep, at her face, I realized that I no longer knew this woman. I left home that morning, turned off my phone, drove around town, stood on the roadsides in the woods. It's hard to explain, but it felt somehow easy, and I felt like a bird out of its cage. It felt like I had paid in full for all my mistakes. I thought and remembered, and became more and more aware of my freedom. In the evening, I returned home, where I informed my wife of everything. There was a long talk, but no recriminations. She cried, saying that she had been waiting for this day all this time. Strangely enough, I no longer felt pity for her. I correctly explained to her my understanding of life at that moment, and she told me hers. She asked for forgiveness over and over again, and I told her that I had forgiven her long ago, but that I was no longer the man she had married. We lived almost 23 years, all 15 years until the tipping point. I lived only for her and my daughter, and the next 8 years I don't even remember. During this time, I have never reproached her for anything. I lived through everything. But during this period, a lot has changed, and first of all, my understanding and attitude towards everything. I realized that further marriage with her is a waste of time. My daughter grew up and almost jumped out of the family nest. My wife came to terms with it. I think she realized that our paths had long since diverged, and we were just, by inertia, walked side by side. But to be objective, because there were good things in our life, while I was in the dark, nothing existed for me, and I was happy. We finalized the divorce. I explained everything to my daughter. She is old enough to understand everything. We continue to see her, much more often than with my wife. Life goes on. The emptiness that echoed in my soul for so long does not ring anymore. There is no permanent woman. I am afraid, and I do not want to. Now I know for sure, what does not kill us at once, it makes us invalids.